After the accident in turn 4 at the end of the Daytona 500, we've lost Dale Earnhardt.
After the wreck in turn 4 at the end of the Daytona 500, the unthinkable happened. On February 18, 2001, NASCAR lost its biggest legend, Dale Earnhardt. To the viewers at home, it looked like nothing more than a small bump into the wall. Just another minor crash in the final moments of an intense race, but that impact held secrets far darker than anyone imagined. Dale hit with such force that everything just stopped. While others walked away with cuts and bruises, his crash was far more violent. The crucial final milliseconds of that moment were never caught on camera. And what's more chilling, there had been signs for months, but no one listened. No one acted. The truth behind that crash goes beyond tragic, it's disturbing. This is the full account of how one of racing's most iconic champions met his end, and how that single moment forever changed the sport he gave everything to. The 2001 Daytona 500 was meant to be a celebration. A new era for NASCAR. Fox Sports had just inked a broadcast deal. The world was watching. Terry Bradshaw was the Grand Marshal. And the night before, Dale Earnhardt had taken him for a ride, slamming the wheel toward the wall. Just to give the football legend a scare, there was buzz everywhere. This race was going to reshape NASCAR's future. Cameras were everywhere. Stands were packed, and millions were tuned in. Right in the middle of it all was Dale Earnhardt, the 7-time champion, the Intimidator. He had fought hard to be back here, stronger than ever after years of painful setbacks. He'd broken his collarbone at Talladega, damaged his neck at Atlanta. For a while he raced with one functioning arm. In 1999 he was a shadow of himself. But in 2000 he roared back to life. He was fast again, feared again, and it wasn't just luck. His longtime friend and team owner Richard Childress had urged him not to give up when things looked bleak. It wasn't him, Childress had told him. Our cars weren't fast. Enough, I'd fix that. As the green flag dropped, no one had the slightest clue that this race would mark the most devastating day in NASCAR history. What followed would leave fans, teams, and an entire industry shaken to the core. Just 2 days before the race, Dale sat down with Darrell Waltrip, former rival, now a TV analyst, for an interview. Something unusual happened during that conversation. Dale, always calm and reserved, suddenly stood up and burst with emotion. "I'm a lucky man. I've got it all," he shouted. He spoke about finally getting things right with his family, with his marriage, with fatherhood. He talked about how fast his car was and how much faster the cars on his team were. But under the surface, there was something else, something that lingered. Looking back, it felt like he was saying goodbye without realizing it. The night before the race, Dale met with his old friend Terry Labonte for a business meeting. They were signing what was sure to be a profitable contract. But then, out of nowhere, Dale said something that stopped the room cold. "That's if I make it that far." Everyone chuckled, assuming it was just Dale being Dale, but he didn't laugh, he didn't smile. He just sat there. Terry would never forget it. Linton never forgot those words. They stuck with him forever. At the time, it already felt strange when he heard them, but as he would recall years later, they echoed even louder in his mind. Exactly 24 hours after they were spoken, Dale Earnhardt Jr. also sensed something was off that day. His father, who normally walked straight to his car without a word to anyone, broke his routine. He came over and said, "Hey, you can do this. We've got good cars, man. We're going to do this together." Junior remembers thinking how unusual. That was his dad. Never did that before races. But this time, he made the effort. Looking back, that small break from the norm felt like a sign. At the time, though, no one saw it coming. Everyone's eyes were focused on the Track-On, the car that was soon to go airborne and end in tragedy. Behind the scenes of NASCAR's biggest event of the year, there was an unseen struggle playing out, a battle over safety gear that could have changed everything. It was a fight that would make what happened to Dale Earnhardt even harder to accept. 3 young drivers had already lost their lives in NASCAR in the past year: Adam Petty, Kenny Irwin Jr., and Tony Roper, each one had died from the same kind of injury that would take Earnhardt. A basilar skull fracture. Experts in racing safety knew there was a solution. A device called the Hans, short for head and neck support, had been developed. Made of carbon fiber, it connected the driver's helmet to their shoulders and reduced the chance of neck and skull injuries. But Earnhardt rejected it completely. He had a deep personal resistance to the Hans device. When a reporter once asked if he'd ever wear one, Earnhardt gave a chilling reply that still haunts the sport: "I ain't wearing that damn noose." Despite growing pressure, he refused to be convinced. Even when NASCAR, General Motors, and Ford brought in Dr. John Melvin, a leading expert in car crash safety, to Daytona for a demonstration, Dale Earnhardt didn't attend. He was the only driver who skipped it. Robert Hubbard, the man who co-invented the Hans device, was right there at the 2001 Daytona 500. His work area was set up between Dale Jarrett and Bill Elliott, both of whom were preparing to use the new safety gear. Hubbard was just feet away from Earnhardt, but the legendary driver wouldn't even listen. "I was within a few feet of Earnhardt, and he just didn't want to hear about the Hans," Hubbard later wrote in his book. "I knew who was going to listen to me, and I knew who wasn't." Out of the 43 drivers in that Daytona race, only 5 wore the Hans device. One of them was Kyle Petty, still grieving the loss of his 19-year-old son, Adam, who had died the previous year from the same injury that was about to take Earnhardt. Kyle's Hans device sat ready in his car, already providing protection. The irony was devastating. The tool that might have saved Earnhardt's life was already making a difference for others. But for him, it was too late, and the race began. The 2001 Daytona 500 kicked off just the way NASCAR had hoped. It was thrilling, fast-paced, and packed with the kind of drama fans loved. 14 drivers traded the lead 49 times. Dale Earnhardt was in the thick of leading on 4 separate occasions. Up in race control, NASCAR President Mike Helton watched everything unfold. From above the track, he could see that it was shaping up to be a great race. Behind him sat NASCAR Chairman Bill France Jr., both men pleased with how the day was going. Fox Sports, which had invested billions in the broadcast rights, was getting the show they had dreamed of. The crowd of 150,000 roared every time Earnhardt surged to the front. Their cheers were so loud, they even rose above the thunder of the engines. Dale Earnhardt was at his best: fearless, aggressive, determined. He was giving the fans exactly what they came to see. He was the Intimidator. And no one imagined it would be the last time they'd ever see him race. Something happened that should have warned everyone of what was coming. With just 25 laps remaining, the race saw its first major crash, a devastating pileup on the backstretch involving 20 cars, nearly half the field. Tony Stewart's bright orange car veered sharply to the right and slammed into the concrete wall at full speed. What followed was terrifying. Stewart's car hit the wall head-on and spun backward. Roof flaps, meant to prevent cars from lifting off the ground, deployed instantly, but they weren't enough. 2 other vehicles struck Stewart's car, sending it airborne. The car flipped completely, landed on the hood of another, and barrel rolled twice before finally sliding to a stop in the grass. It looked like the kind of crash nobody could survive. The wreckage barely resembled a car at all. But against all odds, Stewart emerged under his own power. Shaken, yes, but miraculously unharmed. How could he have walked away from such a catastrophic wreck without a single serious injury? When NASCAR later inspected the remains of the vehicle, they discovered something shocking. The steering wheel was bent and dented, damaged where Stewart's helmet had struck it. Because the impact was head-on, his head had traveled straight forward, not sideways. Incredibly, the steering wheel absorbed the worst of the force, likely saving his life, while cleanup crews worked to clear the wreckage. Dale Earnhardt spoke over the radio to his team owner, Richard Childress. He was relieved Stewart was okay, but then he said something that would stay with Childress forever. "Richard, they're going to have to do something about these cars, or they're going to get somebody killed." Just 20 laps later, those words would prove hauntingly prophetic when the race resumed. With 20 laps to go, Dale Earnhardt found himself in a situation he had never experienced before. In all 22 of his previous Daytona 500 races, he'd always chased the win for himself. But this time, he had a different mission. He was protecting two cars he owned, one driven by Michael Waltrip, the other by his own son, Dale Earnhardt Jr. It was unlike anything fans had ever seen from him. Known for his fearless, aggressive driving and his refusal to surrender an inch. On the track, Dale now took on a different role. With his two cars in first and second, he made a surprising move, on lap 183. While leading the race, he let Michael Waltrip pass him, bringing Dale Jr. along. Then, in a stunning display, Dale dropped behind them and began blocking the rest of the field. He weaved side to side across the track, keeping any challengers at bay. Michael Waltrip, who had never won a race in 462 career starts, could hardly believe what he was seeing. "We all knew the biggest threat to stop one of us from winning was Sterling Marlin," Waltrip later recalled. Behind him was Dale Jr., and behind both of them was Dale Sr., performing a masterclass in blocking like no one had ever witnessed before. For the next 17 laps, Dale held off some of NASCAR's fiercest competitors. Sterling Marlin and Rusty Wallace were charging hard from the inside, while Ken Schrader led a pack on the outside. But no matter what they tried, they couldn't break past that black three-car barrier between them and the front, moving like a guardian angel across the track. It was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Dale was taking tremendous risks, weaving at nearly 180 miles per hour. One wrong move, one misjudgment could have spelled disaster. Yet he kept doing it, relentlessly defending his son and teammate like his own life depended on it. When the white flag waved, signaling the final lap, Waltrip and Dale Jr. had begun to pull away from the rest of the pack. The strategy was working flawlessly. Dale Earnhardt was about to witness something incredible, his son and teammate finishing first and second in the most important race of the year. But what happened next would reveal that his fearless protection had come at a devastating cost, just 80 milliseconds. That's all it took. As the cars thundered through turns 1 and 2 for the final time, Sterling Marlin made a last, desperate move to close in on the leaders. He dropped low on the track, trying to dive beneath Dale Earnhardt's car, which was blocking his path. In response, Earnhardt swerved downward to shut the door on Marlin's charge. What happened in the moments that followed would be dissected in painstaking detail, frame by frame, millisecond by millisecond, by some of the world's top crash investigators. But no matter how much data they gathered, the conclusion was the same. The truth was horrifying. Earnhardt's car hadn't fully cleared Marlin's when he moved down to block. The light contact was enough to send Earnhardt spinning left, sliding across the flat apron at the bottom of the track. For a brief second, it looked like he might regain control. The front of his car began to point back toward the track, hinting at a recovery. But the laws of physics had already taken over. In an instant, the car veered back up the banking and cut straight into the path of the speeding pack behind him. The field was 3 cars wide. No one had time to react. Ken Schrader, directly behind Earnhardt, couldn't avoid him. Schrader's car smashed into the right side of Earnhardt's vehicle, sending both machines hurtling toward the outside wall. In the broadcast booth, Darrell Waltrip was shouting in celebration for his brother Michael, who was seconds away from his first-ever NASCAR win. But out of the corner of his eye, Darrell caught a glimpse of the black 3 sliding out of control. To viewers at home, it didn't seem like anything major. Just another late race incident, dramatic, sure, but survivable. But this crash was far from routine. When Dale Earnhardt's car slammed into the concrete at turn 4, it was moving at 160 miles per hour. The angle of impact wasn't head-on. Like Tony Stewart's earlier in the race, it was worse, a side angle that applied devastating forces to the human body. In just a split second, the car's speed dropped by over 40 miles per hour. The collision registered at around 60 gigaseconds, enough force to crush the entire front right side of the car flat against the wall. Inside, Earnhardt's 184-pound body was thrown with enormous force. He took a violent hit to the back of his head. His left lap belt, already old and fraying, snapped under pressure. It all happened in the blink of an eye, just 80 milliseconds, less than 1/10 of a second. That's all it took to claim the life of a racing legend. NASCAR's most iconic figure was gone, and the sport would be forever changed. The silence afterward was deafening. As Earnhardt's car coasted down the track and came to a stop in the infield grass, it appeared undamaged. It wasn't on fire. It hadn't crumpled like Stewart's earlier crash. It looked, to most onlookers, like just another wreck that the Intimidator would walk away from. He'd done it 100 times before. But Ken Schrader knew better. His car had stopped right next to Earnhardt's, the two machines resting side by side. Schrader got out limping from the impact of his own crash. Still, his first instinct was to check on Dale. He approached the No. 3 and looked inside. What he saw in that moment would stay with him for the rest of his life. To this day, over 2 decades later, he refuses to describe it. All he's ever said is, "I just knew that it wasn't good." Dale was in serious trouble, and his body language said it all. Instead of the usual wave or thumbs-up drivers give after a crash to show they're okay, Ken Schrader began frantically signaling the oncoming safety team. His urgent gestures were the first clear sign that something was very, very wrong. Doctor Steve Bohannon had only been Daytona's chief emergency doctor for a year. He treated plenty of crash victims. But as he reached Dale Earnhardt's car less than 10 minutes after the collision, he instantly knew this was different. Anytime a driver is unconscious, we know it's going to be a tough situation. Bohannon would later recall, "When I got there and looked at him, he showed clear signs of a basilar skull fracture, things no doctor ever wants to see in a driver. Blood from the nose and airway. Blood from the ears, unconscious, unresponsive, not even trying to breathe." The medical crew moved fast. They cut the roof off Dale's car right there on the track and began life-saving efforts. But even in that moment, Dr. Bohannon knew the outcome. "Truthfully," he said, "when there are no signs of life after major blunt force trauma, the chances of survival are almost zero. But we still try everything. We go for heroic measures." As the doctors fought to revive him, Michael Waltrip was in victory lane, celebrating the first win of his career, completely unaware of what was happening just a few hundred yards away. Meanwhile, Dale Earnhardt Jr., who had just finished second, instinctively rushed toward the infield care center. But the moment he locked eyes with Ken Schrader, who was behind a curtain being checked himself, he knew. That look told him everything. And he knew he had to get to the hospital fast. At Halifax Medical Center, just over a mile from Daytona International Speedway. The scene was heartbreaking. Dr. Bohannon and a trauma team of over a dozen worked frantically on Dale. They tried to inflate his collapsed lungs, took chest x-rays, pumped blood into his body, but the internal damage was beyond repair. Amid the chaos, Dr. Bohannon noticed someone quietly standing at the back of the room. It was Teresa Earnhardt. She had just arrived and stood silently, composed, saying nothing. Not interfering, just watching as the doctors tried everything. She was calm, Bohannon later said. She never interrupted, never said a word. She was the only person in the room who wasn't part of the medical team. Dale Jr. arrived shortly after. One look into that trauma room was enough. The way the doctors moved, their body language, it said it all. "We knew it right away," he said. "The second I saw what was happening, I knew Dad was gone. I turned and saw Junior Rhodes, and I just ran to him. There was this sound coming out of me, ... I can't even describe it. It was this deep, raw, aching bellow, grief, fear, shock, all at once. But nothing that day was more gut-wrenching than what happened next. As a technician began preparing Dale's body, he reached to remove the wedding ring from his hand. That's when Teresa spoke, for the first and only time. From the back of the room, in a firm, quiet voice, she simply said one word, "No." Dr. Bohannon stood quietly as the technician looked to him, unsure of what to do. "Do what she says," Bohannon recalled simply. "I walked out after that." That moment has always stayed with me. When NASCAR finally released the official accident report, the findings were devastating. Dale Earnhardt had sustained multiple serious injuries, a broken ankle, fractured ribs, and a shattered sternum. But what killed him was something far worse, a basilar skull fracture. It was a catastrophic injury, fractures in every bone where the skull connects to the spine. The crash had also torn through his left side lap belt. But the most haunting discovery came when investigators reviewed photos of the car. Bloodstains coated nearly every surface inside the cockpit. The crash lasted less than a second. But the violence of that moment inflicted unimaginable trauma on Dale's body. At 7 p.m. that night, NASCAR President Mike Helton stepped into a crowded media center at Daytona International Speedway. Just before facing the press, he asked his colleagues a painful question: "How in the world do I say that we've lost Dale Earnhardt?" NASCAR Vice President Paul Brooks answered him with quiet clarity. Just like that. Holding the microphone tightly, Helton gathered the strength to speak through the grief. Fighting back tears over the loss of a friend, he delivered the words that would shake the sport to its core. "This is undoubtedly one of the hardest announcements I've ever had to make. But following the crash in Turn 4 at the end of the Daytona 500, we've lost Dale Earnhardt." That same night, phones rang in the homes of Jim Downing in Atlanta and Robert Ward in Michigan. These were the men who had invented the Hans device, a head and neck restraint Dale had chosen not to wear. Now suddenly stock car drivers and racing teams were calling them, desperate for information. The device they had created was no longer optional. NASCAR's safety revolution had been triggered, but at a heartbreaking cost. In the months that followed, changes swept through the sport. The Hans device became mandatory. Every track replaced concrete walls with energy-absorbing barriers. Cars were redesigned from the ground up with stronger roll cages, better seat belts, and seats built to protect lives. All of it, every single change, was driven by one goal: to make sure no one would suffer the same fate as Dale Earnhardt. Years later, not a single NASCAR driver has died in a race-related crash. The sport Dale gave everything to, his passion, his legacy, his life was forever changed by the tragedy that took him. His death forced NASCAR to confront a deadly truth it had ignored for too long. In the end, Dale Earnhardt gave the sport one final, priceless gift: safety. What part of this story struck you the most? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.